The humans gave their answer in exactly 29 days. Velkaran was present when the transmission reached Concord High Command. A human fleet of 112 vessels had assembled at the edge of their system. They were ready to join the war. But they had conditions. The Concord had expected demands for technology, for territory, for political power. Instead, the humans asked for something far simpler. They wanted access to every piece of tactical data the Concord had ever collected on the swarm, every battle report, every scientific study, every failed strategy. They wanted to know their enemy. The admirals agreed without hesitation. What harm could it do? The data had not helped the Concord win. Let the newcomers waste their time studying it. A joint command was established, and the human fleet was assigned to defensive positions in the Vara sector. It was a quiet region, far from the main fighting. The Concord called it a strategic reserve. Everyone knew it was a way to keep the untested humans out of the way. Velkaran requested a transfer to the human fleet. His superiors were confused by the request, but they approved it. After all, someone needed to document the newcomers for the archive. Velkaran told himself that was the only reason he wanted to go. He arrived on the human flagship, a massive vessel named Defiance. 3 weeks later, the ship was unlike anything in the Concord fleet. It was not elegant or beautiful. It was functional, practical, built for one purpose only. War. The crew welcomed Velkaran with polite curiosity. He was the first alien many of them had ever met in person. They asked him questions about the galaxy, about other species, about the Concord. In return, he asked them about Earth, about their history, about their wars. What he learned disturbed him deeply. The humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. Nations had risen and fallen in endless cycles of conflict. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and they had come close to using them more than once. By every measure the Concord used to evaluate species, humans should have gone extinct long ago, but they had not. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. And now, faced with an enemy from beyond the stars, they had done something that Velkaran would not have believed possible. They had united. He watched the reports come in over the following weeks. Nations that had been enemies for centuries were now sharing resources. Scientists who had worked in secret for competing governments were now collaborating openly. Factories that had built weapons for internal conflicts were now producing ships and equipment for the war against the swarm. The speed of it was impossible. The Concord had spent decades building its alliance of 12 species, and there were still tensions and disagreements. The humans had achieved near total unity in less than a month. Velkaran asked one of the ship's officers, a woman named Commander Chun, how this was possible. She smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. "We have always been good at war," she said. "We just needed something worth fighting together for." Months passed. The human fleet remained in its defensive position, running drills and training exercises. The Concord's other allies began to mock them. The newcomers were cowards, they said. They were afraid to fight. They had talked big, but when the time came, they hid in the shadows and let others die. Velkaran heard these insults and said nothing. He had been watching the humans closely, and he knew the truth. They were not hiding. They were studying. Every day, human analysts reviewed the tactical data the Concord had provided. They ran simulations, built models, tested theories. They interviewed Velkaran for hours, asking questions about swarm behavior that no one had ever thought to ask before. They were not preparing to fight the same war the Concord had been fighting for 40 years. They were preparing to fight a different one. The breakthrough came on a cold evening in the ship's tactical center. Velkaran was present when a young human scientist burst through the doors, clutching a data tablet with shaking hands. "We found it," she said. "We found the weakness." Within hours, the human admirals had assembled in the war room. The scientist, whose name was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, presented her findings. Velkorn listened with growing amazement that the swarm was not a single entity. It was a network, a vast web of biological connections spanning light years. At the center of each regional cluster was a queen, a massive creature that served as a living command node. The queens coordinated the actions of billions of drones, directing attacks and organizing defenses. The Concord had known about the queens for years. They had tried to kill them many times, but the queens were always buried deep within consumed worlds, surrounded by defensive fleets and billions of ground forces. Every attempt to reach them had failed. Dr. Tanaka had found something different. By analyzing patterns in swarm behavior, she had discovered that the queens were not just commanders. They were the network itself. Without a queen, the drones in that region would lose coordination. They would become confused, disorganized, easy to destroy. Kill the queen, and the entire regional swarm would collapse. The human admirals studied the data in silence. Then the fleet commander, Admiral James Morrison, spoke. "How do we reach them?" Dr. Tanaka hesitated. "That is the problem, sir. The queens are too well protected. Any conventional attack would be destroyed before it got close." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then we do not use a conventional attack." He outlined a plan that made Velkarn's blood freeze. The humans would not try to fight through the swarm defenses. They would punch through them. Suicide runs with heavily armored ships, carrying weapons powerful enough to destroy an entire continent. The ships would be lost, along with their crews. But if even one got through, the queen would die. Velkarn could not believe what he was hearing. "You would sacrifice your own people? Knowingly send them to their deaths?" Morrison looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death already. "Every soldier who serves knows they might not come home. We do not ask them to die. We ask them to fight. If dying is what it takes to win, then we will find volunteers. We always do." The humans requested a meeting with Concord High Command to present their plan. Velkorn transmitted the request himself, along with a summary of the findings. The response came 3 days later. High Command had reviewed the proposal and rejected it. The strategy was too aggressive, too costly, too barbaric. The Concord did not fight that way. They would continue with established tactics and wait for a better opportunity. "Commander," Chun read the rejection with no visible emotion. Then she turned to Admiral Morrison. "Orders, sir?" Morrison stared at the screen for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. "Prepare the fleet. We move on Vareth Prime in 72 hours." Velkorn felt his heart skip a beat. "The Concord has forbidden this action. You cannot simply ignore their orders." Morrison turned to face him. There was no anger in his expression, no defiance. Only a terrible, quiet resolve. "We did not come here to watch the galaxy burn. We came here to save it. If the Concord will not let us fight, we will fight without them. And when we win, they can thank us or condemn us. Either way, the swarm dies." The human fleet began its preparations that same night. Velkorn watched from the observation deck as ships formed into attack formations and crews said goodbye to loved ones through long-range communications. He should have reported this to High Command. He should have warned them that the humans were about to launch an unauthorized attack. But something stopped him. A voice in the back of his mind that whispered a single question. What if they succeed? He stayed silent and watched the stars. In 3 days, everything would change. The Battle of Vareth Prime began in silence. Velkorn stood on the bridge of the Defiance as the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Before them lay a nightmare. 2,000 swarm vessels surrounded the consumed world like a shell of death. The planet itself was barely visible beneath clouds of organic matter, its surface crawling with billions of drones. Somewhere deep below that living carpet, the regional queen waited. 30 human ships faced an enemy that outnumbered them by more than 60 to 1. Admiral Morrison stood at the center of the bridge, his face carved from stone. Around him, officers moved with quiet efficiency, checking systems and confirming coordinates. There was no panic, no hesitation. These men and women knew exactly what they were about to do. "Open a channel," Morrison said. "All ships." The communication officer nodded. "Channel open, sir." Morrison spoke into the silence. "This is Admiral Morrison to all vessels. You know why we are here. You know what we face. The Concord told us this was impossible. They told us to wait, to hide, to let others fight and die while we watched from safety. We rejected that order." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Today, we show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. Today, we remind the swarm that they are not the only predators in the universe. Some of us will not survive this battle, but those who fall will fall fighting, and those who live will carry their memory forward. We are not here to die. We are here to win." He straightened his shoulders. "All ships, begin attack run. For Earth, for humanity, for everyone the swarm has taken from us." The fleet surged forward. Valkarn had seen many battles in his 3 centuries of life. He had watched the elegant maneuvers of Concord fleets, the careful positioning and strategic withdrawals that his people considered proper warfare. What he witnessed now was something entirely different. The humans did not maneuver. They charged. 30 ships flew directly into the heart of the swarm formation, weapons firing in all directions. The swarm responded immediately, thousands of vessels converging on the small human fleet. Valkaran watched the tactical display as red dots swarmed over the blue, markers of human ships. The first vessel fell within minutes. A destroyer named Courage, torn apart by concentrated fire from dozens of swarm ships. Its reactor detonated in a flash of white light that took 3 enemy vessels with it. Then another fell. And another, but the humans did not slow down. They did not retreat. They pushed forward, every ship fighting with desperate fury, buying time and distance for the vessels behind them. Valkarn realized what they were doing. The outer ships were sacrificing themselves to create a path. They were dying so that others could reach the planet. 12 ships through the outer perimeter, an officer reported. Approaching planetary defense zone. The swarm had built a second wall around Vareth Prime itself. Massive organic structures floated in orbit, bristling with biological weapons. These were the Queen's personal guardians, the last line of defense. 6 more human ships fell breaking through that wall. Their deaths were not quiet. Each vessel fought until the very end, engines burning, weapons firing, crews refusing to surrender even as their hulls were torn open by swarm attacks. One captain, her ship crippled and burning, aimed her vessel at the largest defense platform and accelerated to maximum speed. The collision destroyed both. 6 ships reached the planet's atmosphere. The swarm pursued them down. Thousands of smaller vessels diving after the human ships like predators chasing wounded prey. But the humans had planned for this too. 4 of the remaining ships turned and engaged the pursuers, forming a defensive screen above the atmosphere. 2 ships continued their descent. Valkarn watched the tactical display with his heart pounding. The 2 ships, Vengeance and Retribution, plunged through clouds of toxic gas and swarms of aerial drones. Both were taking heavy damage. Both were still flying. Then Vengeance exploded. A direct hit from a surface weapon had found its reactor. The ship vanished in a ball of fire that lit up the planet's dark sky. 1 ship left. Retribution. The bridge of the Defiance fell silent. Every eye was fixed on the single blue dot descending toward the planet's surface. It was damaged, trailing smoke and debris. its weapons nearly exhausted. But it was still moving. "Come on," Commander Chun whispered beside Valkoran. "Come on." The ship reached the coordinates Dr. Tanaka had identified. Somewhere beneath that spot, buried under kilometers of organic matter and rock, the Queen waited. The ship's captain, a young man named David Park, sent one final transmission. "Package delivered. Tell my family I love them." Then he detonated the weapon. The explosion was visible from orbit. A column of light punched through the planet's surface, vaporizing everything within 100 kilometers. The shockwave rippled outward, visible even through the toxic clouds. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the swarm went still. Valkoran watched in disbelief as 2,000 enemy vessels stopped moving. Drones that had been attacking moments before now drifted aimlessly, their coordination gone. The great organic defense platforms began to fall from orbit, their guidance systems dead. The Queen was dead. And without her, the regional swarm had become nothing more than mindless animals. The surviving human ships, 12 out of 30, regrouped in high orbit. They were battered, burned, barely functional. But they had one. Admiral Morrison stood motionless on the bridge, staring at the tactical display. His face showed no triumph, no celebration. Only exhaustion and grief. "Casualties?" He asked quietly. 18 ships lost, sir. Approximately 9,000 personnel confirmed dead. 2,000 more wounded." Morrison closed his eyes. "Send word to the Concorde. Tell them Varath Prime is secure. The Queen has been eliminated." The message reached High Command 6 hours later. By then, the news had already spread through the fleet. Other species had been monitoring the battle from long range, expecting to watch the foolish humans die. Instead, they had witnessed something that none of them could explain. 30 ships against 2,000. An impossible victory won through tactics no civilized species would ever consider. Valkoran spent the days after the battle interviewing survivors and recording their stories for the archive. He spoke with soldiers who had watched their friends die. He spoke with officers who had ordered their own ships into certain destruction. He asked them all the same question: how? How could they do this? How could they sacrifice so many of their own people? The answers were always the same, spoken in different words but carrying the same meaning. Because someone had to, a wounded pilot told him, one arm missing and her face covered in burns. The Concorde would not do it. So we did. "We are not afraid to die," an engineer said, his hands still shaking from hours of emergency repairs during the battle. "We are afraid of not trying. They took our choice away," Commander Chun explained, speaking of the swarm. "They made it simple. Fight or be consumed. We chose to fight, whatever the cost." Valkoran began to understand something that his people had never grasped. The Concorde fought to preserve themselves. They measured victories in lives saved and territories held. They retreated when the odds were bad and advanced only when success was certain. Humans did not think that way. Humans fought to win. They accepted losses that would break other species. They made sacrifices that seemed insane to civilized minds. And they did it all with clear eyes and willing hearts, knowing exactly what they were giving up. They were not brave in the way Valkoran understood bravery. They were something else entirely, something that had no word in his language. He watched a memorial service held for the fallen 3 days after the battle. 9,000 names read aloud, one by one, while the surviving crews stood in silence. Many wept. Many held each other for comfort. But when the service ended, they returned to their posts. They repaired their ships, restocked their weapons, and prepared for the next battle. Admiral Morrison found Valkoran on the observation deck that evening. "You are recording all of this for your archive," Morrison said. It was not a question. "Yes," Valkoran admitted. "My people will want to know what happened here." Morrison nodded slowly. Make sure you tell them the truth. We are not heroes. We are not monsters. We are just people trying to protect our home. This is what we do when we have no other choice." He turned and walked away, leaving Vel'Koran alone with the stars. The archivist stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything he had seen. Then he returned to his quarters and began to write. The galaxy was about to change, and he would make sure no one ever forgot how it happened. Word of Vareth Prime spread across the galaxy like fire. Within days, every species in the Concord Alliance knew what had happened. 30 human ships had attacked 2,000 swarm vessels and won. They had killed a queen, something no other fleet had ever accomplished. They had broken the enemy in a way that 40 years of careful warfare never had. The reaction was immediate, and dramatic dot species that had mocked the humans now sent urgent diplomatic requests. Governments that had dismissed them as primitives now offered trade agreements and military alliances. The admirals who had rejected the human battle plan quietly deleted their rejection orders and pretended they had never existed. Vel'Koran watched all of this from his position aboard the Defiance. He had been offered transport back to Sylthian space several times, but he always refused. He told his superiors that his work documenting humanity was not yet complete. The truth was simpler than that. He could not look away. The Concord officially integrated human forces into the main fleet 2 months after Vareth Prime. Admiral Morrison was given command of a joint task force, with ships from 6 different species under his authority. It was the fastest promotion any newcomer had ever received in Concord history. Vel'Koran transferred to the new command ship, a massive Concord dreadnought named Eternal Light. He was assigned as an official liaison between human and Concord forces. Though everyone knew his real job was still to watch and record. The war changed after that. Human tactics spread through the Alliance like a virus. Their strategy was simple but brutal. Identify queens, strike hard, accept losses. The Concord had spent 40 years fighting defensively, trying to minimize casualties while slowly losing ground. The humans threw that approach away. They taught the other species to ambush. They showed them how to hide fleets in nebulae and asteroid fields, waiting for swarm forces to pass before striking from behind. They developed psychological warfare techniques that confused and disoriented the hive mind. They created new weapons, terrible devices that the Concord had banned centuries ago. Some of the allied species refused to adopt human methods. They called the tactics barbaric, uncivilized, beneath the dignity of advanced peoples. Those species continued to lose battles. The ones who listened started to win. Vel'Koran participated in 11 major engagements over the following year. Each one taught him something new about humanity, and each lesson left him more unsettled than the last. He watched human soldiers charge into hopeless situations with smiles on their faces, joking with each other about death as if it were an old friend. He saw engineers work for days without sleep to repair damaged ships, their bodies pushed beyond any reasonable limit. He observed pilots volunteer for missions they knew they would not survive, saying goodbye to their friends with handshakes and promises to meet again in whatever afterlife they believed in. But what disturbed him most was what happened after the battles. The humans mourned. They mourned deeply and openly, in ways that shocked the other species. They held ceremonies for the dead, spoke their names aloud, wept without shame. They built memorials on every ship and station, walls covered with photographs and personal items from fallen comrades. Then, the very next day, they went back to war. Vel'Koran could not understand how they did it. How could they feel so much pain and still keep fighting? How could they bury their friends one day and charge into battle the next? It seemed impossible, a contradiction that should have broken them. He asked Commander Chen about it one evening, after a particularly costly victory that had killed 300 human soldiers. Does it not hurt? He asked. Does losing so many not make you want to stop? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. It hurts more than you can imagine, she said. Every death is a wound that never fully heals. But we do not fight because we enjoy it. We fight because the alternative is worse. If we stop, if we give up, then everyone we have lost died for nothing. We owe it to them to keep going, to finish what they started. She looked at him with eyes that held decades of grief compressed into a single moment. The pain reminds us what we are protecting. It makes us stronger, not weaker. That is something the swarm will never understand. That is why we will win. The war turned in the Alliance's favor over the following months. System by system, the swarm was pushed back. Queens fell one after another as joint fleets executed the human strategy with increasing efficiency. For the first time in 40 years, the Concorde was advancing instead of retreating. But Valkyran noticed something else happening beneath the surface of victory. A new fear was spreading through the allied species, whispered in private conversations and hidden in diplomatic messages. What happens when the war ends? The question haunted the Concorde's leadership. They had invited humanity into the Alliance out of desperation, expecting primitive soldiers who would follow orders and die in useful ways. Instead, they had found something else entirely. A species that learned faster than anyone had thought possible. A species that turned weakness into strength and defeat into victory. A species that fought with a ferocity that made even them rage. Swarm seemed tame by comparison, and now that species had warships, weapons, experience, allies who owed them their lives. Karan overheard a conversation between two Concorde admirals late one night. They did not know he was listening. They are too dangerous, one said. Look at how quickly they advanced. Look at what they accomplished in barely 2 years. What will they be capable of in 10 years? In 50? They saved us, the other replied. We would be dead without them. That is precisely the problem. We owe them everything, and they know it. What happens when they decide they want something we are not willing to give? Do you think they will simply ask politely? The conversation faded as the admirals walked away. Valkaran remained in the shadows, thinking about what he had heard. He had begun writing a new entry in his archive, a document he called The Doctrine of Fury. It was his attempt to explain humanity to future generations, to capture everything he had learned about this strange and terrifying species. He wrote about their violence and their compassion, their cruelty and their kindness, their willingness to destroy and their desperate need to protect. He wrote about soldiers who died laughing and commanders who wept for enemies they had killed. He wrote about a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself, only to unite in an instant when faced with a threat from beyond. He wrote about the look in Admiral Morrison's eyes after every battle, the weight of every death pressing down on him like a physical force. He wrote about Commander Chun's explanation of grief and strength. He wrote about the memorial walls and the goodbye ceremonies and the way humans held each other in the darkness, and he wrote about fear. The fear the swarm should feel, knowing that these creatures were coming for them. The fear the Concorde felt, knowing that these allies might one day become enemies. The fear Valkaran himself felt, watching a species that seemed to have no limits when properly motivated. He finished the document on the eve of the final battle. The swarm had been pushed back to its origin world, the place where the Prime Mind waited. This was the creature that controlled all the queens, the heart of the entire hive. Killing it would end the war forever. The combined fleet of 300 ships prepared to jump to the swarm homeworld. Humanity had volunteered to lead the assault, and the Concorde had accepted with poorly hidden relief. Valkaran stood on the bridge of the eternal light as the countdown began. Around him, officers from a dozen species worked together in tense silence. Human and Sylphian and all the others, united against a common enemy. He wondered if that unity would survive what came. Next, the fleet jumped. The final battle was about to begin. His swarm homeworld was a horror beyond description. The planet had no name in any language, only a designation in Concord star charts. It hung in the void like a diseased eye, its surface completely covered by organic matter that pulsed and writhed with alien life. Massive tendrils extended from its equator into space, connecting to orbital structures that defied understanding. This was not a world anymore. It was a living thing, ancient and terrible, and its heart weighted the prime mind. Velkaran stood on the bridge of the Eternal, light as the Allied fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. 300 ships from 12 species, the largest force ever assembled in Concord history. Against them rose a swarm armada of 10,000 vessels, the final defenders of their origin world. For a long moment, no one moved. The two fleets faced each other across the void, each side measuring the other. Then the human ships broke formation. 74 vessels. Every ship humanity had brought to the final battle accelerated toward the planet. They did not wait for orders from Concord Command. They did not coordinate with Allied forces. They simply moved forward, as if drawn by an invisible force. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communication system, calm and clear. To all Allied vessels, the human fleet will engage the swarm defensive line and create an opening. Follow when the path is clear. To the swarm prime mind, we know you can hear us. We know you understand. You came to our galaxy thinking you would consume everything in your path. Today you learn that some prey bites back. The transmission ended. The human fleet accelerated to attack speed. Velkoran watched the tactical display as the 74 ships disappeared into the swarm of enemy vessels. Red dots surrounded the blue markers like water closing over drowning sailors. The Allied fleet held position, unable to help, unable to look away. The battle that followed was chaos. Human ships fought with the same desperate fury Velkoran had witnessed at Verith Prime. They dove into formations of enemy vessels and opened fire in all directions. They rammed larger ships when their weapons failed. They detonated their own reactors when their hulls were breached, taking dozens of enemies with them in final acts of defiance. Ship after ship fell. The names scrolled across the tactical display in an endless list of sacrifice, valiant, indomitable, fearless, redemption. Each one 1,000 lives extinguished in fire, but the human fleet kept moving forward. Somehow, through the storm of death and destruction, they carved a path toward the planet. After 2 hours, the defensive line broke. Thousands of swarm vessels still remained, but they were scattered, disorganized, unable to maintain their formation. The Allied fleet finally moved forward, pouring through the gap the humans had created. Velkoran counted the surviving human ships. 23 remained, less than a third of their original force. They had lost over 50 vessels in 2 hours, more than any other species had lost in the entire war, and they were still fighting. The Allied fleet engaged the remaining swarm defenders, while the human ships continued their descent toward the planet. This was the final stage, the attack that would determine everything. Someone had to reach the prime mind. Someone had to deliver the killing blow. The Concord had developed a new weapon for this moment, a device powerful enough to penetrate the planet's organic shell and destroy the creature buried beneath. Only one ship needed to get through. Just one. 19 human vessels entered the planet's atmosphere. The swarm threw everything at them. Billions of aerial drones rose from the surface, filling the sky like a living storm. Anti-ship weapons fired from structures embedded in the organic ground. The air itself seemed to fight against the invaders. Ships fell faster now. 3 vanished in the first minutes of descent. 5 more followed as the defensive fire intensified. The tactical display flickered and jumped as interference from the planet disrupted communications. Velkaran lost track of individual vessels. All he could see were brief flashes of light through the toxic clouds as ships exploded or crashed. Then silence. For 11 hours, no communication came from the planet's surface. The Allied fleet held position in orbit, fighting off swarm counterattacks and waiting for word. Velkaran stood at his station without rest, watching the display, hoping for any sign of success. The waiting was worse than any battle. Not knowing was its own kind of torture. Then, at the start of the 12th hour, a single transmission broke through the static. Prime Mind neutralized. Threat eliminated. Humanity endures. The swarm stopped. Velkorn watched in amazement as 10,000 enemy vessels went dark. The great orbital structures around the planet began to collapse, their biological systems failing without the Prime Mind's guidance. On the surface below, the organic matter that covered the world stopped moving, stopped pulsing, stopped living. It was over. 40 years of war, billions of lives lost, countless worlds consumed. And it had ended with 3 words from a human radio. Humanity endures. The Allied fleet remained in orbit for 3 days, clearing debris and searching for survivors. 19 human ships had entered the planet's atmosphere. Only 4 emerged. 30 crew members alive, out of nearly 6,000 who had made the final descent. Velkaran was present when the survivors returned to the eternal light. They came aboard in medical shuttles, carried by automated systems because most were too wounded to walk. They looked like ghosts, their eyes hollow and their bodies broken. But they had one. The Concorde held a grand ceremony 1 week later, a celebration of victory attended by representatives from every Allied species. Medals were given, speeches were made, promises of eternal friendship and cooperation filled the air. The humans attended. They stood in their dress uniforms, their faces carrying a weight that no celebration could lift. They accepted the gratitude and the honors with quiet dignity. Then they returned to their ships. Velkarn found Admiral Morrison alone on the observation deck that evening. The human commander stood in darkness, looking out at the stars. "You did not stay for the celebration," Velkarn said. Morrison did not turn around. "I have celebrated enough victories in my life. They all feel the same after a while. You saved the galaxy. Does that not mean something?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "We lost 62,000 people in this war. Soldiers, engineers, pilots, medics, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers. They had families, dreams, futures. All of it gone now. Lost in the fire we walked through to get here." He finally turned to face Velkorin. His eyes were wet. "I am proud of what we accomplished, but I cannot celebrate when so many chairs will be empty at dinner tables back home. I cannot cheer when I know how much it cost." He looked back at the stars. "We did what had to be done. That is enough." Velkaran returned to his quarters that night and made his final entry in the archive. He wrote about the Battle of the Swarm homeworld, the sacrifice of the human fleet, the moment of victory. He recorded the facts, the numbers, the strategic analysis that future historians would want. But he also wrote something else. A personal note addressed to any future generation of Concorde leaders who might one day consider making an enemy of humanity. "I have spent 3 years among these people," he wrote. "I have watched them fight and die and mourn and rise again. I have seen their cruelty and their compassion, their rage and their love. I understand them now as much as any outsider can. They were not built for peace. They were forged in its absence, shaped by endless conflict, hardened by suffering that would break any other species. They learned to unite against common enemies because their survival depended on it. They learned to sacrifice because they had no other choice. When this war began, we thought of them as primitives, useful tools to throw against our enemies. We were wrong. They are not tools. They are not weapons. They are something far more dangerous. They are survivors. I witnessed humanity enter this war. I watched them study our enemy when others laughed at them. I saw them charge into impossible battles and win through sheer determination. I observed them grieve for their dead and then return to fight the next day. I recorded everything they did, everything they sacrificed, everything they became. And I tell you now, with the certainty of one who has seen what they are capable of when truly provoked, do not give them a reason to fight again. They will answer. They will come for you with the same fury they brought against the swarm. They will accept losses that would shatter your civilization. They will keep coming until one side is destroyed, and it will not be them. The swarm thought themselves apex predators. They learned differently. We of the Concord thought ourselves superior beings. We learned differently too. Humanity is awake now. They have seen the stars. They have tasted victory against impossible odds. They know what they are capable of, and so does the rest of the galaxy. Keep them as friends. Honor your debts to them. Never, ever make them your enemy. For every star will learn to fear the silence before their arrival. Every world will know the weight of their attention. Every species will understand, as I do now, that the greatest danger in this galaxy is not the monsters that lurk in the void. It is the quiet species from the forgotten world who learn to fight by fighting themselves. I witnessed humanity enter the war. Now every star fears them. As they should. Valkoran saved the document and submitted it to the Grand Archive. Then he turned off his terminal and looked out at the stars one final time. Somewhere out there, human ships were heading home. Survivors returning to families, heroes returning to a world that would never fully understand what they had done. Valkoran whispered a blessing in his native language, a prayer for those who had fallen and those who would carry the burden of survival. Then he went to sleep and dreamed of a galaxy that would never be the same.